Hey guys, Tim Trich here with Ethernet Blueprint. Welcome to video number 4 of our new little mini-series called Unifi for Newbies. Now, if you're new to my content or you just stumbled upon this video, this is video number 4 of an 8-part series, all released at the same time and geared towards anyone who is new to the Ubiquiti ecosystem. So if you're building a house, doing your research, or maybe you got your gear and you're looking to set it up for the first time, you are in the right place. Now, if you just happen to stumble upon this video, it may be a good idea to start off with video number 1, where we talk about who a Unifi network is even for. Then we dive into the components that make up a network, as well as how all of them connect together to build this great system for your home. And at the end of that video, I even make some general suggestions on equipment that I like to use and continue to use with my projects to help you kind of get a leg up in your research. Now, video number 2 was all about the research. We actually moved over into the Unifi store where I showed you how to maneuver around and look at certain specifications of the equipment so you guys can start piecing together the network that's going to work best for you, and also start to put together some of your pricing, because we know cost is a big part of this process. Now, video number 3, we actually dove into a little bit more of the fun stuff and we set up a network. I show you how to plug in your gear, how it physically connects together, and we talk through that process. And I show you 2 different ways that you can actually set up your equipment. One with a smartphone and one with a laptop computer, so you guys can figure out which option is best for you. Video number 4, we are taking it a step further. We're going to take that general setup and we're going to start applying some configuration around it. So we're going to build some VLANs in this video. We're also going to build some Wi-Fi networks, and I'm going to show you step by step how that's done. So if that interests you guys and that's where you are in your process, come along for the ride. That's what we're going to do. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we are not going to be directly plugged into our UDM Pro for this video. We're actually going to access it from the cloud. So I wanted to talk through that a little bit real quick. It's very, very easy to do. So the website you're going to go to is ui.unifi.com, and that is going to bring you to a login screen. Now, you're going to want to use the login that you created as part of our video series, but this is your Ubiquiti login. And if you have multi-factor authentication turned on, make sure you have your smartphone ready for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get logged in here. This is the account we use for the system, and I'm going to go ahead and say sign in. It's going to ask me to verify it's me, so I'll go ahead and say yes. And now we are logged into our manager. Now, I have a couple things that you can see here because I manage multiple sites, but the one we set up earlier was my UDM Pro, so that's where we're going to go right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click that tile. Before I do, just know there's a couple different ways to view things. You can actually adjust that right here. Typically, this is the view I like. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and it is going to take us into the network portion of our controller, and things should start to look very familiar. Now, before we get going on this, I think it's best to give you just a little bit of a tour so you know how to get around. This is your UDM or your network dashboard, and as you start using your network in your home and going to websites and streaming, this site will come more to life. It'll tell you your top devices, your most active clients, which we don't have any. It'll talk about your just overall experience, how your Wi-Fi is performing, all sorts of things built into here to kind of just show you at a glance how your network is doing, okay? That is this top part with the dashboard. Next, we have our topology, and if you go into the topology, it's basically going to give you a network map of the equipment that we have plugged in. And there's a couple cool things that you can do with this that I will show you as part of this. One, the top down isn't always the best way to do it, so you can actually rotate it so it's to the side, which I think that's fairly new and that's something nice they did. You can zoom in, drag things around, pull in a part of the section if you're just trying to hone in on part of your network, and as you start adding clients, they'll all be shown here as well, so you know which clients are connected to which access points and all that. It really is a great system, but Ubiquiti takes it a step further. By clicking this little icon right here, you can actually show your internet traffic. Now, before I click this, just know we're not going to have much. There's nothing connected to this network, but it is designed to show you where your traffic and which clients are using the most bandwidth as you do it. So right now we really don't have anything, but I'll try to remember to circle back to this because it really is cool to see like clients actually utilizing your bandwidth. So if you're streaming on a TV, it'll show up as a bolder section showing you that more bandwidth is being used by that one device, and it'll actually show you the path of that device as it gets out to the internet. Really, really cool. So that's your topology. Now, this section should look a little bit familiar. This is our Unifi devices where we adopted all of our gear. Everything's still showing online, and again, we're not quite to the camera part yet, so just forget that G3 bullets here for the time being. The next section is our client list. Now, we don't have any clients connected, and it's not really important for this part of it right now, but eventually, obviously, you're going to have clients in here, and this is where we would go to list out those clients. It's going to show you devices that are connected to your Wi-Fi, which ones are physically connected, and it gives us a chance to name those clients, all that stuff to make your network very personalized so you know what is actually on it. Then we're going to get over into Port Manager. Port Manager is just where we can go to look at VLANs and quickly get to switch ports and configure switch ports just based off of how we want them. So this is a really nice little section. It used to be used to go into your switch and then go into Port Manager, and now they've just basically made it so you can get to it right from over here. This is radios, so basically we're not going to go into this too much for this video series at all, but this is an area where you can kind of look at your environment and how well your 5 gigahertz is doing, but it's basically driven towards how well your Unifi wireless environment is going. Insights, again, not going to be part of this video series, but you can really try to inspect your traffic, see how much your traffic is going where, and really dive into what's happening on the network. This is your system log, so this is going to tell you, what's happening on the network from admin activity, people logging in, clients switching from one port to another, or Wi-Fi clients jumping from one access point to another. And if you have any alerting that's critical, it'll show up in here and show you that you're having problems and hopefully give you some insight on how to fix it. And then settings, which we will be in here a lot. The settings is right where we're going to be working in today. So that is a general outline of how the network controller interface is put together and how to click around to certain areas. If you guys have yours stood up and you're at the place where I am, I encourage you to go look around, click around a little bit, kind of learn your way around. You're not going to break anything, which is good. We're kind of at a new point in this, but that's the best way to learn, is just get in there and click around. So I encourage you guys to do so. All right, so before we get in and start the configuration process, I'm a big believer in planning out your networks, okay? Understanding which devices you guys have in your home and where you want them to sit. Now, you guys may not know at this stage how to plan your network, and that's okay. The point of this series is to help get you started. Everything we're building in here builds this great starting point and blueprint, if you will, to sort of help you get to where you need to be. Now, you may have some very specific things in your network that are going to be a little bit different, but everything here is going to be a great foundation for a starting point. So that's why we're putting this series together. Now, if we move over to the slide, I'm going to talk about what we're actually going to build today in our video. So we already have a default network. That's VLAN 1. When we set up our gear and brought it online, your equipment creates a default network. That's why it's a default network. And that network is deemed VLAN 1, and it is 192.168.1.1 in our case. Now, the building process is going to start out with the IoT network. Now, the IoT network we're going to call VLAN 2, and it is going to be 192.168.2.1, okay? Then we're going to build a camera network, or camera VLAN, and call it VLAN 3, and that's going to be 192.168.3.1. Now, the reason we're doing the camera network is because as part of this series, we are building a Unifi Protect camera system, and I want to put all of our cameras on their own network. But that may not apply in your case. If you have maybe more Wi-Fi or Ring cameras or Google cameras that connect to your wireless, that may be more considered an IoT device, and you would add them to your IoT network and not have a camera network. But the choice is really up to you. Next, we're going to build the guest VLAN, okay? And the guest VLAN is going to be VLAN 99, and it's going to be 192.168.99.1. Now, you might notice a little pattern here with our VLANs. Usually that third octet, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 99, is what we call our VLAN ID. So it helps you remember what IP addresses are. You know in your head that VLAN 3 is 192.168.3 dot whatever. And so that's why we do it that way. Okay? Now, then we're going to dive over into our Wi-Fi networks, and we're also going to create those today so we can start adding some clients and get some people using this thing. Now, our main Wi-Fi network is going to be our VLAN 1. It is going to be our more secure network. This is what we're going to deem for our laptops, where we're going to do our online banking and maybe work from home and stuff like that. That we're going to call My Home Wi-Fi. That's going to be the Wi-Fi name, and the password is going to be Ethernet Blueprint 1. And any device connecting on that network will connect to VLAN 1 and receive a 192.168.1 dot something IP address. Okay? Next, we're going to create our IoT Wi-Fi, and that is going to be VLAN 2. We're going to call that My IoT Wi-Fi, and the password is going to be less secure, just like it's shown there. Now, I put the guest on here, but as part of this video, we are not going to actually create the guest Wi-Fi. I have a video 100% dedicated to the guest VLAN, and we'll actually create our Wi-Fi as part of that video. But we are going to create the VLAN as part of it, just so we know it's done, and that video can focus on the guest Wi-Fi portion and how Ubiquiti handles it. So we're only going to be creating the top two today. Okay guys, so in order to set up the settings of our network, we're going to need to go down and choose settings from our side menu. Now when we come over here, and we will be in here a lot, this is where our firewall rules are going to be set up in a later video. This is where we set up our Wi-Fi networks under Wi-Fi, and where we set up our VLANs. And our VLANs are set up under networks, okay? Now the order you want to do this in is you want to set up your networks first, and then set up your Wi-Fi and connect or tie your Wi-Fi to the specific networks, okay? So if you do the Wi-Fi first, then you have to go back and fix it after you create your network. So we want to create our networks first. So we're going to go ahead there and click networks. Now you might notice that we have the default network already built in here. It is a 192.168.1 dot network, and it's already done for us. This was done when we set up our equipment. That's why it's called the default network. Now, we could go in and edit this network if we wanted to. We could click into it and make some changes, but because our plan is to leave that a 192.168.1 dot network, we're just going to leave that alone, okay? We're going to leave it alone. So now we're going to go ahead and create a new virtual network, and that is done by clicking right here. So when you do that, it's going to open up this dialog box, and we're going to go ahead and name our network. So the next network that we want to make is the IoT network. So we're going to call this IoT network, okay? Very simple. It's just a descriptor. The IoT name doesn't really mean anything in this case. It's just a description so we know what it is. The router always needs to say UDM Pro or UDM Ultra Gateway or whatever your router that you're setting up as part of this, okay? If you bought a big fancy switch that is capable of doing layer 3 routing, good for you. We're not going to be setting that up in this video series. We're going to make our router and leave the VLAN and the routing to that device and not do it in our switches, okay? So just make sure this is whatever type of router you're setting up, the UDM SE, whatever you are. And you can see it just chose the name we set up in our last video if you happen to catch that. Next thing we're going to do is do our IP address scheme. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck the auto scale network, even though Ubiquiti has done a really good job of guessing what we're going to be doing. Okay, and they just kind of go in order. So they're going to guess our camera network just fine too, but our guest network, we're going to actually have to go in and type some stuff. So we want our next network to be 192.168.2.1. The subnet mask should be 24, which basically means it gives you the ability to have 254 IoT devices on your network. If you need more than that, you can slide this around a little bit, but in most cases, this is going to cover a lot of your needs. 254 specifically IoT devices is a lot, okay? So if you need something bigger, you guys might want to do a little bit more homework on it. We're going to assume the defaults are going to work. Okay, now if you go down here, you'll see we have our gateway address. That's 2.1. We have, don't worry about the broadcast address, but this part is important. When it hands out IP addresses to our devices, The very first IP address it's going to hand out is 192.168.2.6, and then 2.7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 254. It is not going to hand out automatically addresses 2.2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are reserved IP addresses that you can use for static equipment, okay? So if equipment that you want to have a static IP address, you can actually use that group of IPs that isn't in the IP range, okay? Now, we can adjust this if you want that to be bigger, and actually, I really like having it a little bit bigger than what's by default. We're going to click on Manual, and we're going to go down here, and we're going to see down here that we can choose our DHCP range however we want. So we're going to actually do, and it messed it up because I was sliding this around. So this is actually going to be from 2. Let's just say 20. Okay, that'll be our first IP address it'll hand out. And the last one will be 2.254. Okay, so now we have from 2 to 19 available for static addresses, and we have from 20 to 254 is when you connect a device, it automatically gets an IP address and it'll just connect to the network. So that's what this is. That's how you adjust your DHCP scope or range, as Ubiquiti calls it. Okay, none of these other settings in here we need to set. We're gonna leave those for later videos, and I will be doing some content on them. The last thing we want to make sure is if this is the 2.1 network, that our VLAN ID is set to 2, which it is by default, and so we're gonna go ahead and just say add. All right, so now we have an IoT network right here, and keep in mind, if you messed it up or you change your mind, you say, oh no, I need more static IPs than that. You can just go in here, edit it, change this to 21, hit apply changes, and away it goes. Now, something else I want to point out, if we click, I got to do it faster than that. I'll do it on the next one. So if we go into settings, let's go ahead and set up our next network, which is going to be our camera network. So we're going to come in here, we're going to call this camera network. All right, our router's good. I'm still going to uncheck this, but it is 3.1. That's what we want it to be. We're going to verify it is VLAN ID 3, which is great. And we're going to actually change this to also 3.30. Now, a lot of people like to statically assign their cameras, and that's okay. I don't personally do that, but you can. So, this may vary for you depending on how you'd like your camera set up. So I'm going to hit add and then quickly go over to our Unifi devices and show you that it has to learn when we hit go or when we hit add or save, that our devices will automatically learn this new config. So I'm going to quickly say add, then I'm going to go over here. Oh, I didn't make it. There you go. Look it. So see how these are orange, getting ready, getting ready? That means they just automatically learned their new VLANs. Okay, the UDM Pro learned its new VLAN, and it told the switch that we have about that VLAN. And it only took a second. I had to click over there pretty quick. But you can see every time you make changes, your controller is telling all the devices that need to learn about that what's going to happen. You're going to see it here on the APs too when we build our Wi-Fi. So let's go back into our settings. We're going to build our last network, which is our guest network. So we're going to click on New Virtual Network. This is going to be called Guest Network. Okay, UDM Pro, uncheck this. This time, we don't want 4, we want this to be 99, so we'll go ahead and change that to 99.1. Uncheck this, we're going to go ahead and change that to VLAN ID 99, and I don't care about my DHCP scope for my guests. I'm not going to have any servers or specific things that need to be statically assigned on a guest network, so I'm just going to leave it what it has for the default, and go ahead and say add. All right. There we go. We got our stuff. If we click over here, you can see our devices are learning them. All right, guys, that is it. Our networks are created. Right here on the main networks page, you can see we have the 4 that we set out to do: IoT, camera, and guest, VLAN 1, 2, 3, and 99. All right. Now, we're not going to get into any of these more advanced settings for this video series. They're not really important as of right now, and could come into play later, but for right now, I'm just trying to get the foundation set up, so that's all we're going to really do. Now next we need to build our Wi-Fi network. So we're going to click up into Wi-Fi and we're going to build our two networks. We're going to build our main network, which is going to be connected to the default, and then we're going to also connect our IoT Wi-Fi. So let's go ahead and create our default network first. And so this, where it says name, this is going to be what we call the SSID, or the Wi-Fi name. So when you click on a device and search for your Wi-Fi names, this is the name it's going to choose. So I'm going to call this my home Wi-Fi. Okay, that's what we're calling it. And for the password, we are doing Ethernet Blueprint 1. So Ethernet Blueprint 1. So I'll just show you that right here. Okay, capital E, capital B, number 1, no spaces. All right, now under network, this is why we built the networks first. We have a drop down here and we can choose what network we want. But in our case, this network, our secure network, is going to be our default. So we're going to go ahead and leave that here. Now, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck manual, or check the manual button here and uncheck auto. There's a couple things I recommend turning on or off when I build Wi-Fi networks, so we're just going to cover that here, but we're not going to go into all of the settings. Now, for Wi-Fi band, we want this broadcasting on both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. If we had a Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 6E device that was capable of doing 6 gigahertz, this would also be able to be checked. But because I don't have any 6 gigahertz access points in our network here, then we can't check that box. And so it just grays it out. No big deal. We're going to turn off band steering and we're going to turn on fast roaming. Those are typically things I like to turn on. I also like to turn on multicast enhancement. Okay. Now, that is what how I typically do this. Now, real quick, band steering or band steering right here forces compatible devices to use the 5 gigahertz, which is the faster Wi-Fi band, and hopefully improve overall network performance. However, I've found that with band steering turned on, devices that aren't compatible with 5 gigahertz sometimes struggle connecting to the network because the network is trying to force it to use something that it's not compatible with, and it just that handshake just always doesn't work very well. Fast roaming is really just an experience with connectivity that allows your devices to use a protocol called 802.11r for roaming between your different access points. And so, several years ago, maybe we'd leave it unchecked, but fast roaming is built into a lot of mobile devices now. So I like to turn it on. I've never turned it on and had to turn it off because it broke something in all my years of doing this. So I typically just turn it on. It's completely optional though. And then the multicast enhancement just basically helps convert multicast Wi-Fi traffic to unicast when possible. That's going to help with the discovering of devices and things like that. So that's that network. We're going to go ahead and hit add. That's all we need to do. And if you switch over to our device list here, you'll see our devices are learning. So our switch learned real quick, our UDM Pro learned, and then our two Wi-Fi access points are getting ready. They're learning about that new Wi-Fi access or Wi-Fi network that we just created. So let's go get our IoT network in there. So we're going to go ahead and hit create new. We're going to call this IoT or my IoT Wi-Fi. All right, and the password is going to be less secure. You probably shouldn't use that password, just so you know. Put some numbers, some special characters in there, maybe spaces, whatever. This is too easy of a password, guys. Don't use it, but we're just using it for this video. And then I'm going to go choose the IoT network. So basically, anybody who connects to this My IoT Wi-Fi will receive an IP address of the 192.168.2.network. And that's great. That's going to separate our traffic, guys. So you're going to have devices connected to one network that's going to be over here, and we can secure those and create rules that protect them. And then we can have our less secure devices over here in this basket and basically just give them access to the internet and not let them talk to anything else on our network, which is going to make your network more secure. It's also going to make it run a little bit cleaner because IoT devices are very chatty. They like to check in with the cloud and just they're constantly chit-chatting with the internet, and that can cause congestion on your network. It's not going to cause a ton, but depending on how much you have, you might notice that chatter. And so it just makes things clean. It kind of puts everybody in their own lane, and then we'll create the firewall rules around it. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so just like last time, we're going to go ahead and hit the manual button here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off band steering, and I'm going to turn on fast roaming and Wi-Fi enhancement, or multicast enhancement, just like I did before. Now, one thing I will point out here is if your Wi-Fi IoT devices aren't capable of 5 gigahertz, you can uncheck that here and only broadcast in 2.4 on this specific network. That's completely voluntary, and I found that a lot of IoT devices nowadays are capable of 5 gigahertz, so it's something I really wouldn't probably recommend today, but depending on what you guys have in your network, you could turn off the 5 gigahertz band and only run 2.4 if you wanted to. Again, we're leaving everything to default there, and we're going to go ahead and hit Add Network and let our devices learn about it. I like it. Guys, this is looking good. We're shaping up. Now, there's a couple more things I want you guys to understand as part of creating networks and how it is by default. Now, as it stands right now with no firewall rules in our system, anything that connects to the IoT network Wi-Fi or is on the IoT network physically connected in our switch can talk to our secure network. So by default, Ubiquiti lets everything talk to everything. So if you're going to go to the trouble of making VLANs, you probably should also go to the trouble of doing the firewall rule portion of this series as well. But just doing this step alone, again, will help with some of that chatter that we're talking about, but it's not going to make your network secure. We haven't got to that part yet because, like I mentioned, IoT network and our main network can all talk to each other. Same thing with our camera network, okay? Our camera network can also talk to everything right now, and so can our guest. We haven't created or defined anything special inside of our network that secures it, okay? But we have made it run a little bit cleaner, if that makes sense. Okay guys, so there's one more thing I want to talk about in this video before we proceed on with the rest of the series. Now, earlier in this video, we created Wi-Fi networks and we associated VLANs that we created to those Wi-Fi networks, okay? And that process is pretty straightforward. However, what do you do if your device isn't going to connect to Wi-Fi, but you need to connect it to a VLAN? For example, our camera networks. Our cameras are not going to connect to Wi-Fi. That's why we didn't create a camera network. All of our cameras are going to be physically connected into our switch. So we need to be able to tell our switch to put the camera in the camera network. And so that is done inside the switch port mapper configuration. And I want to show you guys real quick what we're looking to do. Now, hopefully this will add some clarity, and we're going to talk about a couple different concepts here. We're going to talk about trunk ports and access ports, okay? And I don't want to cloud the waters here too much, but the concept is important as you start putting together your network and physically plugging things in, okay? So if we move over to the diagram here, I just want to call out some of the just general differences, and then I'm going to show you how to configure your switch for a VLAN. All right, now there are basically two different types of ports you're going to set up. Now, unfortunately, Unifi doesn't call it a trunk port and an access port, but those are just terms I've used or learned throughout the years in working with Cisco and things of that nature. So, but in general, I like to differentiate the two with those names. And so basically what the difference is that a trunk port, for example, can communicate on all VLANs on that port. So our switch needs to talk to our router and be able to communicate on any VLAN. Remember, our switch might have multiple VLANs, things plugged into it doing multiple VLANs, and it needs to be able to send all of that traffic up to the router to get to the internet or wherever it's going, okay? So for that to happen, the cable, the port that needs to be connected on the two needs to be a trunk port or allow all VLANs to communicate, okay? This is also applicable with our access points. We just set up 2 different Wi-Fi networks doing on 2 different VLANs. Those VLANs, any device that connects to that single access point, that access point needs to be able to communicate on all VLANs. All VLAN traffic needs to be able to communicate through that access point. And so also access points need to be set up as trunk ports, which I'm going to show you how to do here in just a second. Then we're going to move over into access ports. And access ports have a singular function. So if it's a camera, it just needs to be on the camera network and not allow any other VLAN traffic through that cable. We only want the VLAN that the device is using to be configured on that port. Okay, and those are called access ports. So if you look at the diagram, we have our camera, which is on VLAN 3. Maybe we have a living room TV. We threw that on our IoT network, so we want that on VLAN 2. And then maybe we have our work computer physically plugged in our office, and we want that on VLAN 1. We only want this to communicate on VLAN 1. We only want the TV to communicate on VLAN 2, and we only want the camera to communicate on VLAN 3. Okay, those are access ports. APs that do multiple jobs are going to be trunk ports. And going from switch to switch, maybe you have multiple switches in your network, or from your router to your switch, all are going to be set up as trunk ports, okay? So hopefully that concept sinks in enough to get you guys going on this. Now, how do you do it? Let's switch over and let me show you. All right, guys, so in order to configure our switch ports, there are 2 ways we can get there. We can actually click on our switch, because that's where we're going to be configuring this, and go to Port Mapper here, or they've given us a shortcut called Ports on the left-hand side, which takes us directly to our switch ports. Okay, and now up in here, if you have multiple switches, there are drop-downs. So our UDM Pro has a 8-port switch, as you know, which we can configure VLANs on as well. But in this case, because all of our equipment is actually plugged into our switch up here, that's what I'm going to use as my example. But just understand that you can use a drop-down up here to switch between devices depending on what you need to configure. All right, so the easiest thing to talk through first is the access port, and you can see our camera is plugged into port 1. So in order to configure this as an access port, we're going to need to click on this port. Now, it's important to tell you right now that by default, Ubiquiti makes all switch ports be trunk ports, okay? So we really don't have to do much on the port connected to our UDM Pro and maybe to our switch and our access points. We don't really have to do anything on those per se. I am going to show them to you, but we don't really have to do anything because by default, these are all trunk ports. They're all set up the same. So really, you just need to go in and configure your access ports as part of this, okay? So to do that, I'm going to click on the tile here that is in port 1, okay? If I click on the icon, it'll actually take me to the camera settings. We want to go to this port, so we're going to click on that. Now, keep in mind, if you click multiple ports, it will let you do that. You can see right here, we have 1, 2, 4, and 6 connected or selected at the same time. So it's kind of a click in, click out sort of situation. So if I deselect all here up at the top, I can click this port, and when I'm done with that, I can click out of it, and now I'm back and I can click a different one. So it's kind of a click in, click out. So I'm just going to go ahead and click our camera port. Now, I can name this port if I want to. I can call this back camera, so I know what is plugged into that switch port. Very handy. I can power cycle that port right here if I'd like to. If you ever need to reboot a camera remotely, you can do this right from your phone from anywhere, which is really, really awesome. That's what I love about PoE switches that are managed. However, it's right down here that we need to be looking at, okay? So you can see that our native VLAN or network is the default network, which means that anything plugged into this port is going to receive a 192.168.1 dot address. Well, we don't want our camera receiving that. We want it to be a 192.168.3 dot address. So you notice it's a drop down. All we have to do is click that, come down and choose our camera network right there. And now, after we hit save, it will allow that device to receive the right IP address because we created those networks earlier. However, we're not done yet. okay? Because we only want VLAN 3 traffic to go on this port. It's a camera. It doesn't need to do any other VLANing on that port. We need to come down to the one below it, this tagged VLAN management, and choose block all, which basically means block all other VLANs from communicating on this port, okay? And there's custom here. You could actually choose the ones you wanted. You could do 2 of the 3 if you wanted, but we don't want that. We just want just the camera network. Now, it's a little counterintuitive because it says block, and block is a scary word in the networking space. Allow all basically means trunk port. Block all basically means access port. We want this only on the camera network. So this is the proper way to set up an access port on your equipment. And we'll go ahead and hit apply changes. Okay. Now, this camera on its own should receive a new IP address eventually. But if we wanted to speed up that process, I can click back into that port and power cycle it. It's going to say this will triply turn off PoE on port 1. The powered device will restart. That's what we want. So we'll proceed with that, and we'll go ahead and power cycle our camera to help it pull a new IP address. Because when it comes back online, it'll ask, what IP address do you want me to take? And we've just now told it to take a different one. Now, the same thing would happen if you had, say, there's a lot of people out there who have Home Assistant servers set up, or Lutron light switches hubs, and then there's Philips Hue hubs, and those take physical connections into them. So if you were going to want to put one of those on your IoT network, for example, let's just say hypothetically that port 2 is going to be our Philips Hue hub. All right, I'm going to uncheck this one. So now we're back to the main screen. I'm going to choose port 2. We're going to call this Hue hub just so we know what it is. Okay, and this is just an example. I don't have a Hue hub to plug into there. We're going to choose our drop down and choose IoT network. Then we're going to choose block all, and then we're going to apply our changes. So now VLAN 2 is on port 2, and that is designated for our Hue hub, which we don't have, but I just wanted to show you that. Now, for our trunk ports, let's just take a look at one. Okay, right here we have our UAP Flex HD access point. I could name this port if I wanted to, but I don't need to. We want it to be a 192.168.1. address. We want it to be on our secure network, and we want it to allow all VLANs because this access point is talking to multiple devices from different networks. Same thing goes with our UDR. So this is the connection between our switch and our Unifi Dream Machine. We want it to give our switch to have a 192.168.1. address, and we want it to allow all VLANs to communicate on that port, okay? So that is how that is done in your switch. So as you start plugging things into your network and connecting things to the Wi-Fi network, right, then it's just a matter of making sure that you have your VLANs assigned correctly on your switch. The same thing can be done if you have a UDM Pro. One of the things I like about the UDM SE is it's great for cameras because these are all PoE ports. So if you had a UDM SE as your router, you could click all these, right? Click them all at the same time, and I want them all to be on the camera network, and I want it all to be block all, and we'll say apply changes. And now ports 1, 2, 1, 2, well, let me cancel this. Now ports 1, 2, 4, 3, 5, 6, and 7, everything but 8, will be in the camera network all at the same time by hitting confirm. So again, your situation, your network is going to really dictate how this needs to be done, but it is very, very important in this part of the process. So here's your homework, guys. As you get to this part of the stage, don't assign any firewall rules until you have all of your equipment in the network that it's supposed to be on, okay? Get it talking to each other. I promise you, by adding firewall rules, you add a troubleshooting step that you do not want. Remember, by default, all these networks can talk to each other and communicate, and there's no blocking happening. Everything can talk. So once you get your network working the way you want it to, and all of your IoT networks are talking, and all your Lutron light switches are talking to your Lutron hub, and everything's in the proper network, then proceed to start adding firewall rules, because you don't want to be troubleshooting why this can't talk to this, and you don't know if it's a firewall rule, you don't know if it's a VLAN assignment, you just don't know, right? So get everything in its place first before you do my firewall video. I promise you it'll be a step worth taking. Okay, so that is going to wrap up video number 4, guys. I hope you learned a lot. I hope this is helpful. Again, your homework, get all of your devices where they're supposed to be. Make lists, draw it out, write it down, right? Nobody expects everything to just magically know. As you start connecting them to the right network, they're going to fall into the right space. Make sure everything can talk the way it's supposed to, and then we'll move on to the firewall rules. Next, we're going to talk about guest networks, okay? Ubiquiti offers some very, very specific things that you can do with your guest network, maybe for a small business, and some cool ways to display and how to allow guests to connect to your network. So I wanted to designate a short video, I don't think it'll be super long, in how to do that and certain things that you can do with your guest network. It's worth pointing out, so we thought we'd do a separate video for it. But hopefully this helps, guys. We'll see you guys down the road. Good luck with your homework assignments, and get ready for video number 5.